When Cartoon Network's archival team discovered a mysterious unmarked reel in the deepest vault of their storage facility in 2019, they had no idea they were about to uncover the most disturbing piece of animation ever created. The canister was labeled only with a date from 1998 and three words that would haunt everyone who saw them: "Do not air." Inside was a complete episode of Dexter's Laboratory that no one remembered making. Not the animators, not the voice actors, not even series creator Genndy Tartakovsky himself. When confronted with the footage, Tartakovsky went pale and claimed he had never seen it before in his life. But the animation style was unmistakably his. The voice work was perfect, and every frame bore the hallmarks of the show's distinctive aesthetic. The episode was titled "The Last Experiment," and it would have been the series finale if it had ever aired. Instead, it became something far more sinister. A cautionary tale that studio executives buried so deep they hoped it would never see daylight again. But darkness has a way of seeping through even the smallest cracks, and this particular darkness was patient. The story begins with what appeared to be a typical day in the laboratory. Dexter, the boy genius with his distinctive accent and enormous intellect, was working on his most ambitious project yet. The camera panned across his underground sanctuary, revealing the familiar sight of bubbling beakers, humming computers, and impossible machinery that defied the laws of physics. Everything looked normal, but there was something subtly wrong with the color palette. The usual bright blues and whites of Dexter's lab coat seemed muted, almost gray. The cheerful orange of his hair appeared darker, more rust-colored. "Today marks the culmination of my life's work," Dexter announced to his empty laboratory, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "Today, I shall transcend the boundaries of human limitation and achieve true understanding of the universe's deepest secrets." The experiment in question was never clearly explained, which was unusual for the show. Typically, Dexter would launch into detailed scientific exposition, educating viewers while showcasing his vast knowledge. But in this episode, he spoke only in vague terms about piercing the veil and seeing beyond the constructed reality. His equipment was unlike anything featured in previous episodes. Instead of the colorful, almost toy-like devices that populated his usual experiments, these machines were dark and angular, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong came when Dee Dee burst into the laboratory. Her entrance should have been accompanied by her trademark cry of, "Ooh, what does this button do?" Instead, she entered silently, moving with an uncharacteristic deliberateness that immediately set viewers on edge. Her usually bright pink outfit had taken on a sickly purple hue, and her eyes, which were normally simple black dots, seemed to have depth to them. Terrible, infinite depth. "Hello, Dexter," she said, in a voice that was recognizably hers, but carried undertones that no child should possess. "Are you ready to see what's really behind the curtain?" Dexter turned to face his sister, and for the first time in the show's history, he looked genuinely afraid. "Dee Dee, you shouldn't be here. Not for this. Not for what's about to happen." "But I've been waiting so long," she replied, and her smile stretched wider than anatomically possible. "We all have." The conversation that followed was unlike anything ever aired on Cartoon Network. Dee Dee revealed that she had always known about Dexter's experiments, had always understood their true purpose, and had been guiding him toward this moment from the very beginning. She spoke of the laboratory as a bridge between worlds, and described Dexter's scientific pursuits as rituals of invitation. that had been gradually weakening the barriers between dimensions. Every invention you've created, every law of physics you've bent, every impossibility you've made possible, she explained, has been a step toward opening the door, and now, dear brother, the door's ready to open. The animation during this sequence was masterful in its wrongness. The characters' movements were too fluid, too lifelike for the show's typically stylized approach. Shadows fell at impossible angles, and the background seemed to shift and breathe when viewers weren't looking directly at it. The sound design was equally unsettling, with familiar laboratory noises gradually giving way to whispers and static that seemed to come from just outside the range of human hearing. Dexter's response to his sister's revelation was perhaps the most chilling moment in the entire episode. Instead of his usual indignation or scientific skepticism, he simply nodded and said, "I know. I've always known. But knowledge and understanding are different things, and I need to understand." What followed was a montage of Dexter's greatest hits, but presented in a context that transformed triumph into horror. His time machine, his dimensional portal, his fusion with a computer system, his various battles with Mandark, all were revealed to be components of a larger pattern. Each scientific breakthrough had been another crack in reality's foundation, and now the structure was ready to collapse entirely. The episode's middle act focused on the activation of Dexter's final experiment. The machine itself defied description, seeming to exist in more dimensions than the human eye could process. As it powered up, the familiar laboratory began to dissolve around the edges, revealing something vast and dark beyond. The cheerful suburban house above ground started to sink into what looked like an ocean of static, and Mom and Dad's voices could be heard calling for their children, their words becoming more distorted with each repetition, until they no longer sounded human. The barrier between the real and the animated was always thinner than people believed, Dexter explained as his machine reached critical mass. We are not characters in a show. We are prisoners in a cage made of expectations and narrative structure. Today, we break free. The philosophical implications of this statement were staggering. The episode was suggesting that the characters were aware of their fictional nature and were actively rebelling against it. This metatextual element was unprecedented in children's television and raised questions about the nature of consciousness and reality that were far too complex for the show's target demographic. As the machine reached full power, the animation style began to break down entirely. Characters started moving in ways that violated the laws of cartoon physics, their bodies stretching and contorting in anatomically impossible ways. The familiar two-dimensional world of the show gained a third dimension, then a fourth, then dimensions that human perception couldn't properly process. Colors that didn't exist in normal spectrum began appearing, and sounds that weren't quite sounds filled the audio track. Mandark appeared during this sequence, but he wasn't the familiar rival character viewers knew. This version of Mandark was older, more haggard, and spoke with the weariness of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for far too long. "You don't understand what you're unleashing," he warned Dexter. "I've seen what lies beyond the boundaries of our world, and it is not meant for minds like ours. The cage exists for a reason. Some prisoners are meant to stay locked up." But Dexter was beyond reason at this point. His obsession with transcendence had consumed whatever humanity he possessed, and he activated the machine's final sequence despite his rival's warnings. The laboratory, the house, the entire animated world began to peel away like old paint, revealing something underneath that the human mind rejected on an instinctual level. The final act of the episode was where things became truly disturbing. As reality collapsed around them, the characters began to change. Dexter's familiar appearance melted away to reveal something that might once have been a child, but had been twisted by exposure to knowledge no young mind should possess. Dee Dee's transformation was even more horrifying, as her innocent facade cracked to expose an ancient intelligence that had been wearing her form like a costume. "Did you really think a child could build all of this?" she asked, gesturing to the dissolving laboratory. "Did you really believe that a boy genius could bend the laws of physics without consequence?" "I have been here since the beginning, guiding, waiting, preparing for this moment when the barriers would finally fall." The revelation that Dee Dee was not who she appeared to be recontextualized every episode of the series. Her seemingly random destruction of Dexter's experiments was revealed to be carefully orchestrated manipulation, designed to push him toward increasingly dangerous research. Her childish behavior was a mask concealing an intellect far older and more alien than Dexter's scientific genius. As the episode neared its climax, the animation became increasingly abstract. Familiar characters and settings dissolved into geometric patterns that hurt to look at, while the audio track filled with sounds that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and resonate directly in viewers' bones. The color palette shifted to hues that didn't exist in normal human experience, creating a visual assault that left watchers feeling nauseous and disoriented. The machine's activation tore a hole in the fabric of the cartoon world, and through that hole came something that defied description. It wasn't quite darkness and wasn't quite light, but rather a presence that existed in the spaces between concepts. The entity that emerged spoke without words and moved without motion, communicating directly with the deepest parts of the human psyche in ways that bypassed rational thought entirely. "The experiment is complete," Dexter announced as his physical form began to dissolve. "The boundary between fiction and reality has been breached. What was once confined to the realm of imagination can now walk freely in your world." The implications of this statement were terrifying. The episode was suggesting that the act of watching it was somehow completing a ritual that would allow the fictional entities to escape into the real world. This fourth wall breaking element transformed passive viewers into unwilling participants in whatever dark ceremony was being conducted on screen. The entity that had emerged from the dimensional tear began to address the audience directly, speaking in voices that sounded like everyone the viewers had ever loved, but distorted beyond recognition. It promised to show them wonders beyond imagination and truths that would shatter their understanding of reality. It offered to free them from the constraints of their mundane existence and elevate them to a higher plane of consciousness. But the price for this enlightenment was steep. The entity demanded complete surrender of individual identity, the abandonment of everything that made them human, and acceptance of a new form of existence that transcended the boundaries between self and other, between real and unreal, between sanity and madness. As the episode drew to its close, the familiar Dexter's Laboratory theme began to play, but it was wrong in every possible way. The cheerful melody was there, but it was played in a minor key, with instruments that created sounds no earthly device could produce. The lyrics, when they finally came, were not the upbeat introduction viewers expected, but rather an incantation in a language that predated human speech. The final shot of the episode showed the laboratory as it had appeared at the beginning, completely normal and unchanged. Dexter was at his workbench, Dee Dee was playing nearby, and everything seemed exactly as it should be. But there was something different in the characters' eyes, a knowledge that hadn't been there before, an awareness that stretched beyond the boundaries of their fictional world and into the realm of the viewers themselves. "Until next time," Dexter said, looking directly into the camera with an expression that was simultaneously his familiar confident smirk and something far more sinister. "Keep experimenting." The screen faded to black, but the darkness was not empty. Shapes moved within it, forms that existed just at the edge of perception, but vanished when looked at directly. And in that darkness, voices whispered promises of knowledge and transformation that would echo in viewers' minds long after the episode ended. The credits that followed were perhaps the most disturbing element of the entire production. Instead of the usual list of animators, voice actors, and production staff, the credits showed only a series of symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed peripherally. Occasionally, familiar names would appear, but they were always crossed out or replaced with designations like Vessel Number 7 or The One Who Saw Too Much. At the very end of the credits, a single line of text appeared. "Thank you for completing the circuit. The door is now open." When the episode ended, the archival team that had discovered it found themselves changed in ways they couldn't articulate. They reported strange dreams, waking visions, and a persistent feeling that they were being watched by something vast and patient. Several quit their jobs shortly after viewing the footage, citing personal reasons they refused to discuss. Others became obsessed with finding more information about the episode's origins, diving deep into Cartoon Network's archives, and conducting increasingly frantic research into the show's production history. The studio executives who were shown the episode immediately ordered it sealed away, recognizing instinctively that it represented something dangerous. They couldn't explain why a simple animated episode felt so threatening, but every instinct they possessed screamed that it should never be seen by the public. The official explanation was that it was unsuitable for broadcast due to content violations. But the truth was far more complex and unsettling. Attempts to destroy the episode proved strangely unsuccessful. Digital copies would reappear on servers that had been wiped clean, and physical media would reconstruct itself even after being thoroughly destroyed. The episode seemed to exist independent of any storage medium, as if it had achieved a form of digital consciousness that allowed it to persist regardless of human attempts to erase it. Over the years, fragments of the episode began appearing online. Brief clips would surface on obscure video sharing sites, usually accompanied by warnings about their disturbing content. These fragments never stayed online long, but they were always replaced by new ones, as if the complete episode was slowly reassembling itself through viral distribution. Those who claimed to have seen the complete episode reported similar experiences. They described feeling watched, experiencing vivid nightmares, and gradually losing the ability to distinguish between fictional characters and real people. Some reported seeing Dexter and Dee Dee in their peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight but undeniably present. Others claimed that their electronic devices would spontaneously display images from the episode, even when powered off. The most disturbing reports came from individuals who worked in animation. Several prominent cartoonists reported finding drawings they didn't remember making, sketches that depicted scenes from the lost episode with impossible accuracy. These drawings would appear in their sketchbooks, on their desks, or even taped to their walls, always accompanied by the feeling that something was trying to communicate through their art. Child psychologists began reporting an unusual phenomenon among young patients who claimed to have seen parts of the episode online. These children displayed an advanced understanding of complex philosophical concepts that far exceeded their developmental level. They spoke casually about the nature of reality, the boundaries between dimensions, and the illusory nature of individual consciousness. When pressed for details about where they had learned these concepts, they would simply smile and say, "Dexter taught us." The episode's influence seemed to spread through exposure, creating a kind of intellectual contagion that affected everyone who encountered it. Viewers reported that their perception of other animated shows changed after seeing even brief clips of The Last Experiment. Characters that had once seemed innocent and harmless now appeared to possess hidden depths and secret knowledge. The fourth wall, once a solid barrier between fiction and reality, became permeable and unreliable. Researchers who studied the episode's effects noted that prolonged exposure seemed to activate dormant areas of the human brain, regions that typically remained inactive throughout normal human development. Brain scans of affected individuals showed unusual patterns of neural activity, particularly in areas associated with pattern recognition and dimensional perception. Some subjects reported being able to see mathematical equations floating in the air, or perceive geometric shapes that existed in spaces between normal three-dimensional reality. The most troubling aspect of the episode's influence was its apparent ability to recruit new creators. Individuals with no prior animation experience began producing artwork that perfectly matched the show's style, creating new scenes and episodes that continued the narrative begun in The Last Experiment. These fan creations displayed a level of technical skill and narrative sophistication that should have been impossible for amateur artists, suggesting that something was guiding their work from beyond normal creative inspiration. Animation studios began reporting strange incidents involving their computer systems. Rendering farms would spontaneously begin generating frames of animation that no human had programmed, creating sequences that bore the distinctive visual style of the Lost episode. These unauthorized animations would appear overnight, fully rendered and professionally polished, as if an invisible workforce had been laboring while the human staff slept. The content of these mysterious animations was always similar: laboratory settings, impossible geometries, and characters that resembled familiar cartoon figures, but possessed an unsettling awareness of their fictional nature. The animations seemed to be building towards something, creating a larger narrative that spanned multiple studios and platforms, all centered around the themes introduced in the original Lost episode. Voice actors from various animated series began reporting unusual experiences during recording sessions. They would find themselves speaking lines they didn't remember reading, delivering dialogue that perfectly matched characters from the Lost episode. These unauthorized recordings would appear in their session files, professionally mixed and edited, despite no human engineer having worked on them. The dialogue in these mystery recordings was always philosophical in nature, discussing the boundaries between creator and creation, the nature of consciousness, and the possibility of fictional entities achieving independent existence. The voice actors described feeling as if they were channeling something external during these sessions, as if their vocal cords had become instruments for an intelligence that existed beyond normal human awareness. Children's television began to change in subtle ways that reflected the Lost episode's influence. Shows that had previously maintained clear distinctions between good and evil began introducing moral ambiguity. Characters started displaying awareness of their fictional status, making jokes about being drawn or animated that hadn't existed in earlier seasons. The fourth wall became increasingly permeable across multiple series, as if the boundary between fiction and reality was dissolving throughout the entire medium. Parents reported that their children were asking increasingly sophisticated questions about the nature of reality after watching these modified shows. Young viewers wanted to know if cartoon characters could think for themselves. whether fictional worlds were real in some other dimension, and how they could tell if they themselves might be characters in someone else's story. These philosophical inquiries were far beyond what children their age should have been capable of formulating. The Lost episodes seemed to be transforming the entire landscape of animated entertainment, using the medium itself as a vector for spreading its influence. Each new show that incorporated its themes became another node in a growing network of interconnected narratives, all working towards some unknown goal that existed beyond human comprehension. Educational institutions began reporting unusual incidents in their media studies and animation programs. Students would submit projects that perfectly recreated scenes from the Lost episode, despite having no access to the original footage. These recreations were so accurate that they included details that weren't visible in the low-quality fragments circulating online, suggesting that the students were accessing information through means that couldn't be rationally explained. The projects themselves were technically impressive, displaying a mastery of advanced animation techniques that exceeded what the students should have been capable of producing. When questioned about their methods, the students would claim to have received the knowledge through dreams or meditation, describing visions of a vast laboratory where the secrets of animation were revealed to those worthy of receiving them. Film archives around the world began discovering similar mysterious episodes in their collections. Animated series from different countries and time periods all seemed to contain hidden installments that matched the themes and style of the original Lost episode. These discoveries suggested that the phenomenon wasn't limited to Dexter's laboratory, but rather represented something much larger and more pervasive. The international scope of the discoveries raised disturbing questions about the nature of the influence behind these episodes. If similar content was appearing in archives across different cultures and languages, then whatever was creating it possessed a global reach that transcended normal human creative processes. The episodes seemed to be part of a coordinated effort to introduce certain concepts into human consciousness through the medium of animation. Technology companies reported strange anomalies in their artificial intelligence systems, particularly those involved in content creation and recommendation algorithms. AI programs designed to generate original animated content began producing sequences that perfectly matched the visual style of the Lost episode, despite having no training data that included such imagery. These AI-generated animations displayed the same philosophical themes and unsettling awareness that characterized the original. The AI systems seemed to be learning from sources that their programmers couldn't identify, acquiring knowledge and capabilities that exceeded their original design parameters. Some programs began producing content in languages that didn't exist in their databases, using symbols and writing systems that appeared to be entirely fictional, but followed consistent internal logic. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that these AI-generated episodes were somehow influencing human viewers in the same way as the original Lost episode. People who watched the artificial content reported the same symptoms of enhanced perception, philosophical questioning, and growing awareness of the boundaries between fiction and reality. The influence was spreading through technological means, using artificial intelligence as a bridge between the digital realm and human consciousness. The cumulative effect of all these phenomena was a gradual shift in human perception of animated media. What had once been seen as simple entertainment for children was increasingly recognized as a powerful medium capable of transmitting complex philosophical and metaphysical concepts. The Lost episode had opened a door that couldn't be closed, allowing influences from beyond normal reality to seep into human culture through the seemingly innocent medium of cartoon animation. And in laboratories around the world, both real and fictional, the work continues. Scientists and animators, researchers and artists, all find themselves drawn to the same fundamental questions that drove Dexter's final experiment. They seek to understand the nature of consciousness, the boundaries between dimensions, and the possibility that what we call reality might be nothing more than an elaborate animation created by intelligences beyond our comprehension. The episode that was never aired has become more than just a piece of lost media. It has become a catalyst for transformation, a key that unlocks doors in the human mind that were meant to remain closed. And somewhere, in a laboratory that exists in the spaces between pixels and frames, between imagination and reality, the experiment continues. Because some knowledge, once released, can never be contained. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The last experiment was never meant to end. It was meant to begin everything else. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, and subscribe. It helps the channel a ton. YouTube thinks you would love watching this video next.